Welcome back to Jim Brown's Common Sense. Now, here's your host and professor of Thinkology, Jim Brown.
Hey, Jim Brown here with Leo Honeycutt. Leo, let me ask you this. The student debt in America for kids who borrow their money to go to college is now $620 billion. Not million, $billion. That's more than all the credit card debt in America. And it seems like every day there's some article, well, the federal government's got to give relief to these kids who just have borrowed all this money and they can't pay it back, and they're have all these restrictions on them. And I want to talk about this a little bit, about the legitimacy of tax dollars paying back student loans. And to talk about, let's get someone to come and join the conversation, Leo. Catherine Mars is a certified educational consultant, lives over in the Dallas area, and she works with kids who are going to be admitted to college, about how they get in and student loans, and she knows this area well. Her website is marscaa.com. You can find that on my website at jimbrown.usa.com. Hey, Catherine, glad you joined us today.
Well, good morning, Jim. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Catherine, I'm here with Leo Honeycutt. Tell us first about this student debt. It seems like it's growing every year. Do you find that true, that the overall debt is growing at a rapid rate?
Yes, sir. I do believe that it's actually $1.3 trillion, and the $620 billion is actually a number that's used when they're talking about that's how much more it is than credit card debt.
Oh,
and that's
gee.
what's really amazing is that, it's increased fourfold. The cost of college has, much more so than the income that we all make. And so it really is pretty horrible.
Well, there's several things I'd like you to comment on, if you would, Catherine. First of all, are colleges being irresponsible by not monitoring the debt and not trying to advise these kids? And I mean, if it seems like kids are borrowing more and more, and the tuition keeps going up. But is there a responsibility, do you think, on the part of the colleges to say, look, let's look over your program. Now, we want you to take these courses, but how are you paying for all this? Can you handle all this? Are you borrowing too much? Do you think there should be a role for the colleges to monitor how much a student borrows to go to college?
Absolutely. Colleges don't have a buy-in. They don't have any risk. All they do is they take the kids' money. What would be a really responsible thing to do for colleges is to offer courses. Everybody offers a freshman seminar because so many kids are not adequately prepared academically for college, and so they have writing courses for freshmen, and they have all these different things to help freshmen adjust to college. Well, they also need to have a course that's taught in that freshman seminar as part of it on how to manage your money, because there are lots of first-generation kids who get loans to go to college or are offered, big need-based scholarships for college, and yet they're not given any direction on how to manage their money. And so these students oftentimes come out with massive debt, and they don't even know what the interest rate is for their debt, nor do they know that it's due immediately following graduation, or it starts being paid off, versus waiting until after graduate school.
Yeah, it seems like the college, you'd think a lot like, it sounds like it would be better for, say, if the federal government is putting money up for scholarships, let's say, or whoever's putting the money up, it ought to go to the school, and then the school ought to be responsible for monitoring that debt. In other words, as you just said, put the school's skin in the game. Let our colleges have some skin in the game. So if there's a huge default, they're not looking to the taxpayers to pay this off. The school says, listen, we better monitor this because this kid's not making their grades and they can't graduate and pay this back. We're the ones that are going to take the loss. Doesn't that seem like that makes more sense?
Well, it does, except here's the way it goes now, is the federal government allocates certain amounts of money to certain colleges. And it's kind of goes back to the Bennett hypothesis. In 1988, or when Bill Bennett was Secretary of Education, he came up with this hypothesis that said that the more federal aid that goes to colleges, the higher the tuition will be. And then it was revisited in 2009 and 2012, and it was indeed found to be the fact. that the more federal aid that goes to colleges, because colleges distribute the aid to students. It's not the federal government that just says Johnny, who submitted their FAFSA, is going to be given money directly from the federal government to Johnny. It goes through the colleges, and colleges can look at that FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, and decide, oh, well, Johnny actually deserves more than the federal government says that he can have. And so it really is up to the individual colleges how much money is given to a student in loans or in free money and grants and merit scholarships.
Right.
So colleges really do need to have more responsibility on this. And right now, it's kind of like, we'll take your money and it's up to you how to deal with it.
Yeah, and if you don't pay it back, though, the college has no responsibility. Isn't that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, where there ought to be some way where they would have to monitor both the financial end and the educational end. Well, then the next question comes is that and Leo and I were talking about this before on the show. Leo Honeycutt is here, my co-host on the show, and
good
we
morning,
were talking
Leo.
about that.
I'm sorry I didn't say good morning.
Oh, that's okay. I'm listening. I love this.
Taking it all in. I worked my way through college. You ever been to New Orleans at all, down on Bourbon Street at all? Have you done anything like that, Catherine?
You bet.
Well, I used to play my banjo at your father's mustache on Bourbon Street from about 8 in the evening to 1 in the morning, 6 days a week while I was going to Tulane Law School to help pay my tuition. I needed to pay my tuition. And then I worked, I was a night manager of a kind of a flea bag hotel down there, the DeSoto Hotel, I remember, for about 3 or 4 days a week. And I did everything I could to pay. And then I did borrow money. I had a student loan.
But it was your law school degree. It was your second degree. That's one of the big differences. I mean, I'm sorry I interrupted, but it really is. It's about the undergraduate degree that really gets me all ticked off, is the fact that kids borrow so much money for liberal arts degrees that they have little prospect of paying it off quickly, because the type of jobs they're going to start out in the job market often are very low paying. And so when you go for your second degree, sometimes you do have to borrow a little money, but at least you've got better opportunities at the end of that second degree.
But I think Jim is right. This is Leo. That's okay. But I think Jim is right. We worked our way through college. We worked our lives' way through college. We worked on 2 and 3 jobs to try to get through college, to try to minimize that student debt. And now it almost seems like that this is yet another entitlement program that people just assume, these kids assume, is going to be given to them. And now we're talking about possibly forgiving these debts. And so the moment you start talking about that, you've got millions of students out there who are going to start saying, well, wait a minute, if they're going to start forgiving the debt, what's my incentive to pay it off?
Absolutely.
Catherine, I agree that you may have to borrow some money. I mean, the cost of tuition at a number of universities can go up to $50,000, $60,000 a year. But isn't that a factor that you make, and you advise kids about going to colleges? Don't you have to factor that in when you make your decision? If I know I'm going to have to borrow most of my way through college, then maybe I shouldn't be going to a school that charges $60,000 or $60,000 a year for tuition. Maybe I should go to a state university or a junior college. Should I be biting that off? What kind of discussions do you have that with kids that you counsel?
Well, I have discussions with kids on what major they're thinking about, and then that does bring up which college to attend. I have all my students do an Excel spreadsheet so that it shows at the end they can look at it objectively to the amount of money they were given that was free.
Catherine, let me stop you right there. We've got to take a break. I want to come back with you. Tell our listeners we're talking with Catherine Mars. She's a certified educational consultant. Her website is marscaa.com. You can find that on my website at jimbrownusa.com. Talking about what you do in running up huge student debt, and should the federal government, which is you and me as taxpayers, pay this off. We'll talk to Catherine some more after we take a quick little break.
Welcome back to Jim Brown's Common Sense. Now, here's your host and professor of Thinkology, Jim Brown.
Hey, Jim Brown here with Leo Honeycutt. We're talking about the fact that U.S. student debt rose to a record-breaking $1.3 trillion last year, 18th year in a row to make a new high, and it averages about over $37,000 a student in terms of debts. And the question, what do you do about it? Per student is what it comes out to be when they borrow the money.
That's more than most people make a year.
Yeah. Well, on the other hand, Leo, I don't know what you my debt. I had owed about $75,000, and I paid it off over 10 years. Paid it like clockwork under the federal guaranteed loan. Paid a pretty good interest rate. It was like 6% back then, 7%, which was a good interest rate back then. Paid it off. Knew I had an obligation, but now these kids want to get out of it. We're trying to talk about what is responsible for what's the right thing for the taxpayer. I mean, I've made some bad deals, Leo, and the federal government didn't bail me out. And we're talking with Catherine Mars. She's a certified educational consultant. Her website is MARRSCAA.com. And we're trying to see what Catherine thinks. Catherine, pick up on that, if you will, about what is the responsible thing to do. The drums are beating. There's a number of members of Congress saying we've got to help these poor kids. We've got to bail them out. And like I say, shouldn't there be some responsibility on the part of the family and the student borrowing the money to say, look, I got to work within my limits. I'd like to have a Lamborghini, but I can only afford a used Chevrolet. I mean, and so it's the same thing with school. How far do you go, and what is their responsibility, and how much should the taxpayer take on? Would you care to comment on that for me, Catherine?
Sure. First of all, I want to go back and revisit the issue of working while you're in college. Studies show that students who get jobs on campus are much more organized and make better grades. So I always advise my students, even those that don't need money to pay for college, to get a job, even if it's only 20 hours a week, because it will help them organize their time better, and they'll make better grades and show more responsibility. The issue of student debt. When students sit down with me to talk about which college they should attend, we talk about the difference between private schools that will give kids money to attend, private schools that are like the Ivies that do not give money to attend, and state schools that cannot give as much money as some private schools. And we say, okay, well, which one's going to be better for me? And we say, well, okay, what are you majoring in? What do you think you might want to do in college? And if they say, well, I hate engineering and I hate computer science and I'm not good at math and science, then obviously they should not go into those fields, which are today really great fields for getting jobs when you finish school. But if they're interested in history or foreign language or political science, then they really need to weigh which school is going to be the cheapest to attend. Which school will they come out with the least debt? The second thing that students need to do when they visit colleges is they need to go to the Career Center. That needs to be one of the second stop after the admissions office to learn about what will the Career Centers do for them to help them get internships and get summer jobs that will provide them with skills so when they graduate with their degree in political science, they're not going to have to wait tables or work as a clerk typist in a hospital like I did when I got out of college. So the issue is they must look at this from a more objective adult perspective. And when I work with kids, I try very hard to help parents understand that this has to be the student's process. The student has to own going to college, and they have to take full responsibility, including understanding what the cost of college is. If you look at students today who are planning for college, a lot of times their parents are helicopter parents and have done everything for them, have always rescued them, and hovered over them so closely they can't make their own decisions.
Yeah, you're right. They've got to take on that, and then they get into debt over their heads, and without that kind of solid advice from the parents or the school, they, oh my gosh, I'm drowning, help, help, help. And you're right about picking your degrees. Look, I was always interested in political science and English literature and psychology, but there's not many high-paying jobs in those fields. It's gotten so competitive. Colleges are cutting back. And you're right, math and science and computers, that's where the future is in terms of paying the bills. If you want to be a scholar of William Faulkner or Charles Dickens, you may want to do that as a hobby, but you're going to play in this day and time using that as a major and making a significant income.
Yeah, so but when you've got salaries out there, though, that are $5 million for somebody to pitch a ball, you start looking at how much actors make. Well, naturally, people are going to think the younger kids are going to be bowled over by that and say, well, that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to play ball, I'm going to play in the NBA, or I'm going to be an actor.
Well, and in addition, you made a point about, well, math and science is where it's at. Well, it really isn't. If you take a student who is forced to go into engineering when they're in college because their parents say, you have to come out with something that you can get a job doing, and the student goes into engineering and hates it the whole time, and the student beside him, parents say, okay, you can do what you love, and they go, okay, I'm gonna do history. So the kid gets out with a history degree, and in 20 years, the student with the history degree is going to be making as much or more money than the unhappy engineer. The other key factor is
that's interesting. I did.
Yeah,
and
the other key is the fact that it's not where you go to college; it's what you do when you get there. Just the other day, Vanderbilt, one of the retiring admissions people from Vanderbilt, wrote an article, and one of the top things she said in it was, pay attention to what you do in school, not where you go. And that's a true fact, whether it's for grad school or whether it's to go out and get a job. If you have a GPA that's pretty high, then by golly, you're going to get picked over the kid who has a mediocre GPA when you graduate, because a GPA is looked at by every employer out there today. And so it really is important for students to pay attention in school, whether it's like me, who got a degree in anthropology, thank you very much, or if you get a degree in engineering. So it really is important that the student looks at where they go, and they look at what it's going to cost, they look at the major they're going to do, and how dedicated they're going to be when they get there.
Yep.
Well, that's good advice, but I get back then to the taxpayer, though, that is saying, wait a minute, do I pick up this over $1 trillion in debt to where we do all this forgiving? I mean, there seems like, I can understand if you had a slow start in your career, you ought to be able to renegotiate your loan, just like homeowners do with their bank. You say, look, I was on a payment schedule, I just can't meet it, I don't have the job making this needs, can I cut it in half for 3 years and come back and revisit it? There's all kinds of flexibility, but just to say, well, now fine, we're just going to give you the money, and the taxpayer goes in more deeply. It seems like there's got to be a balanced approach, is what you're saying, where you're getting counseling early. You know what your limitations are. You know how much you can reasonably spend. You know what you're going to finance. And if you can't pay it back, there are some options for you. But right now, hey, spend what I want, and I'll just let the taxpayers pick up the cost.
I think that the past 8 years have proven to us that we've been on a track to be an entitled society. That the more dependent that we can have our citizens be, the bigger the government can be and tell us what to do. Well, I think now that we have Betsy DeVos in place for our Secretary of Education, we have a better chance of getting reality in the picture and helping families and all of us be responsible citizens and know that if we're going to borrow money, whether it's to buy a car, a house, or a college education, that we're responsible for that, and that we have to pay it back, and that if we default, that there'll be consequences for that. Families, if they would start early with raising their kids with consequences when they make a mistake, then when they become young adults, they better understand things and they won't make such big mistakes. And that's the case with kids who have never had to worry about money or worry about how to pay it back or anything, where the parents have just done it for them. They don't get it. And so it's real important that from an early age, kids learn to be responsible for their actions.
And, by the way, that made me thinking, what I did Friday? I've got my newest grandchild. I created an educational trust fund where I'm putting a little money. I might put $100 in every now and then, put $25 a month, whatever I've got left over, I put into each of my 7 different trusts for the grandkids. And that builds up over a period of time. You can start planning right now for your college education, your kid right when they're born, or your grandkid when they're born, right?
529s are a valuable asset.
Catherine, thanks for being with us. We're out of time. Thanks. Catherine Mars is a certified educational consultant. Her website is marscaa.com. It's on my website at jimbrownusa.com. Catherine, have a great weekend. Look forward to talking to you again in the near future.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Leo.